This royal guard stayed still, even when a pigeon took over his hat. The afternoon sun shone brightly over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard. A light breeze swept through the crowd of tourists who had gathered outside, many of them clutching cameras, eagerly waiting to capture the iconic changing of the guard ceremony. For many visitors, this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, the chance to witness the legendary royal guards, standing motionless, their discipline and unshakable focus a symbol of British tradition. Among those guards, standing tall and unwavering in his red tunic and black bearskin hat, was Private Thomas Williams. With his rifle gripped firmly in both hands and his gaze fixed straight ahead, Thomas was the epitome of precision and control. He had spent months training for this, learning how to maintain absolute stillness, no matter the distractions around him. And distractions were plenty. Tourists often waved their hands in front of his face, whispered jokes nearby, or tried to make him laugh. Some even attempted to block his march, testing whether he would react. But he never did. Because to be a royal guard meant to embody unwavering discipline. Today, as Thomas stood in his usual spot, he expected nothing unusual. The crowd was lively, taking photos and admiring the palace's grandeur. Some parents lifted their children onto their shoulders to get a better view. Others murmured excitedly about the upcoming changing of the guard. It was just another ordinary shift. Or so Thomas thought. Because in just a few moments, something truly unexpected was about to happen. And soon, he would become the center of attention in a way he never imagined. The lively chatter of tourists filled the air. The sounds of camera shutters clicking and footsteps against the pavement blended into the usual symphony of a bustling afternoon at Buckingham Palace. Then, a soft fluttering sound echoed above the courtyard. At first, no one paid much attention. It was just a pigeon, gracefully soaring through the sky, circling above the crowd. Pigeons were a common sight in London. They gathered in parks, perched on statues, and fluttered about near the busy streets. But this particular pigeon? It seemed to have a specific destination in mind. It swooped lower, gliding effortlessly over the heads of tourists, its wings outstretched, its small black eyes scanning for the perfect landing spot. Some visitors noticed it, pointing casually, but most remained focused on the royal guards, waiting for the ceremonial march to begin. Then, in a moment no one expected, the pigeon descended swiftly. And before anyone could react, it landed directly on the bearskin hat of Private Thomas Williams. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. For a moment, there was silence, a brief pause where everyone tried to process what had just happened. Then, almost simultaneously, the entire courtyard erupted into laughter. People gasped, some clutched their chests in disbelief, while others quickly raised their phones, scrambling to capture the unbelievable sight. "Oh my God! Did you see that?" someone shouted. "It landed right on his head," another laughed. Tourists began pointing, whispering, and nudging each other. Children giggled uncontrollably, parents chuckled, and even the palace guards positioned further away seemed to take note of the spectacle. Yet, despite the unexpected visitor perched on top of his head, Private Williams remained completely still. Not a single muscle twitched. Not a single sign of reaction. Because he was a royal guard. And breaking focus was not an option. Or, was it? The laughter spread like wildfire through the crowd. It wasn't every day that a pigeon decided to make itself at home on top of the royal guard's head. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. Some tourists burst into uncontrollable laughter, Others whispered to their friends in excitement, while some simply stood frozen in disbelief. "This is the funniest thing I've ever seen," one woman said, holding her phone up to record. "Is this part of the ceremony?" a child asked his father, who chuckled and shook his head. Meanwhile, more and more tourists gathered around, eager to see what would happen next. Would the guard react? Would he shake the pigeon off? Or would he continue standing, unshaken, as if nothing had happened? The anticipation in the air was palpable. People started making bets among themselves. "I bet he won't move at all." "No way, he has to react." "This is going viral for sure." But through all the murmurs, laughter, and recording phones, Private Williams remained absolutely motionless. Not a single flinch, not a single blink. It was as if he hadn't even noticed the pigeon sitting on his head. And that only made the situation even funnier. The pigeon, oblivious to the chaos it had caused, shifted slightly on the guard's hat, adjusting its footing. It looked around casually, as if surveying the palace from its new royal throne. The crowd burst into another wave of laughter. Some people even started giving the pigeon a name. "Sir Pigeon I, the new ruler of Buckingham Palace," one man joked. "Look at that. The bird just declared itself king," another added, causing more chuckles. But then, something even funnier happened. The pigeon, completely at ease, began preening itself, right there, on top of the guard's head. It tucked its beak under its wing, fluffed its feathers, and got comfortable, as if it had just found the perfect place to take a nap. The crowd lost it. People doubled over laughing, some wiping away tears. Phones zoomed in, capturing every second of this once-in-a-lifetime moment. But Private Williams? Still not moving. Because no matter what happened, he was a royal guard. And nothing, not even a pigeon claiming his head as a personal throne, was going to make him break focus. Or was it? Because what happened next would make this moment even more legendary. Despite the chaos unfolding around him, Private Thomas Williams remained perfectly still. Years of training had prepared him for situations far more intense than this. He had been taught to endure any distraction, from loud tourists to extreme weather, from unexpected noises to sudden movements. But they never covered Pigeon on your head in training. Underneath his tall bearskin hat, he could feel the light pressure of the bird's tiny feet pressing into the thick fur. He could hear the soft rustling of its feathers, the subtle scratching as it adjusted its grip. But he couldn't react. He wouldn't react. Because a royal guard's duty was to remain unshaken, no matter what. Still, something inside him was starting to crack. Not in frustration, not in discomfort, but in sheer amusement. The bird wasn't just resting on his hat. It was making itself at home. The pigeon gave a little coo, then shuffled a few inches to the side. It puffed out its feathers, fluffed its wings, and then, without a care in the world, sat down. The pigeon had officially claimed its throne. And the crowd? They couldn't handle it. Laughter rippled through the onlookers like a wave. Some tourists were practically doubling over, trying to hold themselves together. "This is the best thing I've ever seen," someone shouted. "That pigeon looks like it's running the place now," another joked. Phones and cameras were locked onto the scene, capturing every single second of this bizarre yet hilarious moment. And Thomas? Still unmoving. But somewhere deep down, he knew this moment was going to be remembered forever. The pigeon was now completely at ease, perched proudly atop Private William's hat. But just when everyone thought the situation couldn't get any funnier, the pigeon started preening itself. Right there, in front of hundreds of people. It tucked its beak under its wing, ruffled its feathers, and casually began cleaning itself as if it were in its own personal grooming session. The crowd lost it. People were crying with laughter, some clutching their stomachs from laughing so hard. "This bird has no respect for the British Army," a man joked. "The Royal Guard has a new commander-in-chief," another laughed. But the absolute best part? Thomas didn't move a muscle. Even as the pigeon fluffed its tail and let out a soft coo of satisfaction, Thomas stood his ground. For a moment, the entire scene felt surreal, a disciplined, highly trained soldier standing perfectly still, while a tiny pigeon casually treated his hat like a luxury hotel suite. And then it happened. The pigeon, feeling even more comfortable, decided to take things one step further. It leaned forward and pecked at the hat. Just a small, innocent peck. Then another. Then another. The bird was literally investigating the hat, as if trying to figure out if it could pull some fur out for its nest. The crowd's laughter doubled in intensity. A young woman gasped, "No way! It's trying to eat the hat." Another tourist shook his head. "That bird has got to be the bravest pigeon in London." But the biggest question remained. Would Thomas finally react? Or would he let the pigeon continue its ridiculous antics? Then, after what felt like an eternity of laughter and suspense, Private Williams finally reacted. Not a big, obvious movement. Not a dramatic shake of his head. But something so subtle, so perfectly executed, that it made the entire moment even funnier. With expert precision, Thomas tilted his head just slightly. Not enough to be seen as breaking protocol, but just enough for the pigeon to lose its balance. The tiny shift caused the pigeon to flap its wings wildly, struggling to stay on. And then it panicked and flew away. The instant the pigeon took off, the crowd exploded into cheers and applause. People were clapping, whistling, and cheering for the guard like he had just won a championship game. One tourist laughed, "That was the smoothest move I've ever seen." Another gasped, "He didn't even move. He just made the bird leave with pure discipline." But the best part? As the pigeon flew into the distance, Thomas resumed his perfect stance. Like nothing had ever happened. Like he hadn't just been the star of the funniest moment at Buckingham Palace. And that's when the cameras zoomed in on his face. Because for just one tiny second, a slight smirk flashed across his lips. Barely there. Almost invisible. But it was enough. And the crowd went wild. Within minutes, the video was all over the internet. Social media platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram were flooded with clips of the pigeon's royal takeover. The captions? Pushpin, even pigeons respect the British Army. Pushpin, the Royal Guard's discipline is on another level. Pushpin, pigeon meets soldier. Soldier wins. Within a few hours, the video had millions of views. News outlets started picking up the story. TV hosts laughed as they replayed the clip. Even official military accounts tweeted about it, calling it a perfect example of discipline under pressure. And as for Private Williams? He became an internet legend overnight. The next time he reported for duty, something unexpected happened. A small group of tourists stood in the front row, wearing toy pigeon hats. They gave him a small salute, grinning from ear to ear. And for just one brief moment, Thomas looked at them. And that tiny smirk? It returned. Before he resumed his stance, standing tall once again, the perfect embodiment of duty, tradition, and unshakable composure. But the world knew. He had won the battle against the pigeon. And that was a moment no one would ever forget.